Wild Riders is a 1971 bikesploitation film that also fits within that year's wave of home invasion thrillers, a wave that would lay the groundwork for one of exploitation cinema's most reliable subgenres, a wave ignited by a real-life tragedy. Directed by Richard Cantor, Wild Riders stars Errol Blanton, Alex Rocco, Elizabeth Knowles, and Sherry Bain. Somewhere in America, two bikers, Pete and Stick, are expelled from their biker gang for being too unstable and dangerous. The duo wanders out west, stumbling upon a California mansion where Rona, the restless wife of a touring cellist, and her friend Laurie are spending their time by the pool doing nothing at all. Pete introduces himself. Rona's receptive to fooling around, so she lets them in. Pete and Stick make themselves at home, taking what they want, raping and terrorizing the women, selling off valuables to fund the trip to Mexico. Rona tries to turn the bikers against each other. Will the ladies escape? Will the bikers escape? And what happens when the cellist gets home? Home invasions are one of cinema's early storytelling tropes. It's a reliable and relatable fear, and the home invasion setup has been used in everything from film noir to family comedies. But the trope really resonated with audiences after the events of August 1969. Charles Manson had a grudge against a Hollywood music executive, so Manson's followers went out to take revenge. The executive wasn't in the home they broke into, but Sharon Tate, wife of director Roman Polanski, was. She would be among the first victims of the Manson family, a series of murders that shocked the entire nation, and the Hollywood community in particular. By 1971, several home invasion films were released, some more directly referencing the Sharon Tate murders than others. They all spoke to a primary fear, that even home wasn't safe, that evil needed no reason beyond itself to appear at your doorstep and cross the threshold. And so Wild Riders fulfills the role of a horror film, giving shape and form to a shared fear, putting it behind glass so the audience can scrutinize it from a safe distance. From its first images, Wild Riders establishes how grim a film it is going to be. A terrified woman is dragged, stripped, and nailed to a tree by Pete and Stick, her corpse abandoned by everyone who witnessed her murder. That's the first scene. Audiences used to escapism and to roller coaster shocks instead witnessed over an hour of unrelenting terror and despair, and by the time that inevitable justice arrives, it's not enough to dispel the destruction left behind. Some stats for the sickos. There are 5 on-screen murders, including by strangulation, shooting, and stabbing. There's plenty of nudity, 2 sex scenes, sex wrapped in violence, literally in a sequence starting around minute 29 when an on-screen seduction in one room is intercut with an on-screen rape occurring in the next room. This movie constantly reminds you that these men are depraved scum. The relationship between Pete and Stick is the most humanizing element about them, with some critics comparing the two to George and Lenny from John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. Stick is the mentally stunted and physically overpowering one that dotes on his friend, while Pete is a calculated one that assumes a caretaker role. This doesn't redeem the two, but it is more character investment than biker characters would typically receive at the time. Other critics have discussed the pair as evil twins of the wandering bikers from 1969's Sleazy Rider, mostly due to Errol Blanton's resemblance to Peter Fonda. Errol Blanton was a fresh face at the time of Wild Rider's release. His first on-screen credit was as a red shirt on an episode of the original Star Trek. He also played the blackmailer in the Crown release Blood Mania. Besides starring in Wild Riders, Blanton co-wrote and sang the opening theme to Wild Riders, He's My Family. He would find steady work in television for the next few decades, and in his later years he would resume his love of performing music. Blanton passed away in 2018. Wild Riders would be director Richard Cantor's last film as Richard Cantor. Under such pseudonyms as Ramsey Carson, Roger Kramer, and others, he would pivot his career in another direction, for a more mature audience throughout the 1970s. Elizabeth Knowles, who played the bored wife, also shifted between TV and film roles under one name, alongside more adult film roles, moonlighting under the name Lisa Grant. Unquestionably, the most recognizable cast member is Alex Rocco, who appeared on screen as Stick. The following year, Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather was released. Rocco's performance as Moe Green would be a star-making turn for him, jump-starting a long and award-winning career. Wild Riders was a record-breaking release for Crown International in 1971 and was expected to be a trendsetter. While history appears to have set this film aside, it possesses many of the ingredients that would become grindhouse standard in the years to come. Wild Riders doesn't have the grit of the vigilante films or the gore of the slasher films that followed, but it does serve as a prime example of what made the exploitation films of the 1970s so different from the decades surrounding. Wild Riders is an ugly film. It's not escapism. It's an attempt to work through a nightmarish scenario, confront some kind of darkness, and possibly imagine how to overcome it. At least, that's what you might get out of this picture. If you find yourself identifying with Pete and Stick, perhaps some self-examination is in order.
I know you think I'm an animal.